Welcome to Access Denied, the tragic story of 15 million children locked outside the schoolhouse door and how we can fix that. My name is Dirk, and I'll be your host. Today we'll be talking with Allison Scott, Lili and Kennan Scott, three trailblazers in tech and leaders in giving back. They're working to level the playing field for those typically excluded. This show is really about the opportunities that technology can offer even beyond education and how we extend the American dream to all the dreamers. Access Denied started with a parent complaint from Oakland, and now we have more than 35,000 supporters demanding internet for all. My original parent was trying to sign up for free internet offered by Comcast, and they couldn't. Their child was being locked outside the schoolhouse door, just like 15 million others, because they had an old bill. With all the self congratulatory backslapping and promises to keep America connected during a pandemic, the opposite is happening. Folks can't get connected, and others are being disconnected. And free often comes with a whole host of strings attached. So we started fighting, and we won in Oakland, at least for now, and at least with Comcast. They opened hotspots and they waived policies. But this can't be a one by one, city by city, company by company fight. We need some federal leadership to support locals in finding real solutions that last, something that has sadly been lacking from the FCC, Congress, and the executive. Internet is not a nice to have. It's not a luxury. It's an essential, and the pandemic has shown us that. And it should be a right, particularly for school children where education is compulsory. And we need to make that happen. On a brighter note, though, let's talk Appalachia. I bet you did not expect to hear that. Last week, we covered the rural digital divide, and I learned a couple things. One, from the hood to the holler, we have the same exact problems and the same solutions. And two, if they can connect everyone in one of the poorest and remotest counties in Kentucky to high-speed broadband, where they use mules to bring fiber optic cables through the mountains, we can do it too. It's an amazing story, but it shouldn't be. One traffic light and faster internet than you or I probably have, and it's universal. Check out the story in the New Yorker and the profound effect access has on people's lives. The opportunities it opens up, the hope it provided, the real changes it made in wages, healthcare, unemployment, education, and many facets of life. There's a quote from a woman in that article that introduces the types of folks that benefited from this. This is a line from the piece. Y'all can read it yourself. These are the people that actually benefited from access. And it really is everything. The woman goes on to get better jobs, better wages, health insurance. She can telecommute and care for her grandchildren who need her. As a side gig, she teaches English to Chinese students for $25 an hour. That's 3 times what she was making prior to access. And all this was made possible by broadband. Access now more than ever can change fortunes or cement struggle. This is about those included, those excluded, and how we change that. And so I'd like to welcome our guests in today. We have some brilliant folks that are making real difference. Allison, Lili, and Kennan. You all can do a better job of introducing yourselves than I can. I just want to thank you for joining the show, and also thank you for doing the work you're doing for our children and our families. Without folks like you doing this work would not happen. And I want to give a special thanks to Kennan, Mr. Scott, as I knew him in Oakland. He was his legend preceded him. When I came to Oakland, I would hear from families about Mr. Scott, Mr. Scott, Mr. Scott, and Mr. Scott's classroom and what Mr. Scott did. And these kids' eyes would light up talking about Mr. Scott and teaching computer science in West Oakland. And the way that opened kids' eyes to the possibilities that they had. In some ways, y'all three are unicorns, and it shouldn't be that way. And so this show is about how we change that unicorn status and really create a stampede of unicorns rather than bringing 3 of us together at one time. So thank you. I'd love for y'all to introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about your work, and I'd love to hear about your background and what brought you to this work. And Allison, maybe if you want to start, we'd love to hear.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having us, Dirk, and thank you for bringing attention to this super critical issue. My name is Allison Scott. I'm the Chief Research Officer at the Kapor Center, located here in Oakland, California, and I'll talk a little bit more about what the Kapor Center does. But first, what brought me to this work? I'm a social science researcher by training, and I've always just been curious to understand why we see such rampant inequality in education and then the impacts that it has on communities of color. And so I've gotten very involved over the last decade or so in the technology ecosystem because of the opportunity that technology brings, as Dirk just mentioned, in a variety of different ways. And I'm super passionate about how we can increase access and participation in tech for communities of color. And ultimately, some of the reasons why technology is driving innovation, it's also driving inequality. Solutions to technology, or technology solutions, can be, it's very critical to think about who's at the table in creating the tech solutions. So we're not just talking about numbers of people in companies, but what types of solutions are they creating through technology, and then how are those solutions impacting communities of color. So I can talk more about the Kapor Center, but I'd also love my colleague Lili to introduce herself.
Yeah. Bring it.
Hello. Good morning. My name is Lili Genghis. I'm the Chief Technology Community Officer at the Kapor Center, and I have the pleasure to work alongside Allison and also an amazing team across a lot of many unicorns that I would say there's definitely a stampede at the Kapor Center. We need to highlight some of those stories as well. And I'll start with my story of why I do this work, why it's passionate, why it's something that I wake up every day, and especially since March, why it's been a pivot to some degree into what are the areas that we are focusing with more urgency and why. And so for me, it really is because a career in technology changed my life. In my first job as a software engineer with no experience, to be honest, maybe like a project here or there at an undergrad, but I found myself making 2 to 3 times what my mom was making, working 2 to 3 jobs, which is crazy. And when we think about the upper economic mobility that technology can bring, the way it can close gaps of wealth, it's my lived experience. And so that's why for me, I think it's really important. And once I started being out and being part of this, what you call innovation economy, what I didn't realize that this pathway is giving me the opportunity to see the future, to get a little bit of a peek of what it would entail. And so I was able to work with different employers, all in connecting technology and startups and federal clients and private clients from a lens of AI, virtual reality, future of IT, robotics, all these buzzwords that we keep hearing. But it was really clear when I was there that it didn't have folks that looked like myself. And so I was seeing the future really being largely designed and created and shaped with that input of voices of color, voices that had different life experience. People like myself as an immigrant from Bolivia, 6 years old, all those, single parent home, English as my second language, where if you take a look at, and here's a plug for the Leaky Tech Pipeline, you take a look at all those barriers, I checked all those boxes. And the crazy thing is that it doesn't mean that you can't jump into into the innovation economy. If anything, it really allowed me to be like, all right, I was able to do it because there was opportunities and pathways. And so my goal now at the Kapor Center alongside the team is to make sure that it's not just by luck, but it's really in a way for more of our talent to really realize their full potential, because we're driving the economy. And so and again, one of the other parts that I echo with Allison is the need for more responsible technology, because we can't just go into the sector and just like build. We have to really be questioning, what are we building and why, for who, and what impacts is it currently having. And if we take a look at some of the largest tech companies, it's unfortunately caused a lot of displacement, but it also can create a lot of opportunity if we are in the room, if we're able to shape it, and then ultimately if we're able to own that technology as well.
Yeah, that's right on. Before you come on, Kennan, I just want, Apple's worth $2 trillion right now. The Times just had an article. The stocks of Apple, Amazon, Alphabet, Microsoft, and Facebook, the 5 largest publicly traded companies in America, rose 37% in the first 7 months of this year. So the 5 largest companies in America are all tech companies. Yep. It's not GE that's going to give you that job. They're all tech. And even when it seems like the world's tanking, these folks are getting rich and they're hiring. So Kennan, I just wanted to throw that in when you mentioned that. Kennan, I'd love to hear a little bit about you and your background, and I'd love to hear a little bit about your work, both teaching and now.
Thank you, Dirk, for having me. I'm blessed to be here with these two rock stars, and you're right. I hope to, for the rest of my life, be known as Mr. Scott from West Oakland Middle School, because that is truly where I found myself, where I found my passion, and where I aligned a lot of like pieces of me that didn't seem to really fit together. I am one of those wonderful stories where opportunity knocked on my door. I wasn't looking for it. I had a shop teacher in high school who decided he was going to start an AutoCAD drafting class. And we had no idea what that was. He had no idea really what that was. But he asked me, he said, you know, you like math. I see you doing graffiti all over the place. Why don't you come and take this class? And I thought, it's that or like a bunch of APs that I'm really not interested in. So yeah, let's do this. This seems really fun. It's artistic. It's cool. And long story short, I got a 98. And I went to him at the end and I was like, man, dude, this is like my first A+ in all of high school. Can I get the full 100? He was like, you go get a degree in civil engineering or some engineering, and then you come back, I'll give you the 2 points. And I was like, you know, true high schooler. I'm like, man, come on. But that led to a career in engineering. And ultimately, AutoCAD drafting was my gateway into that career. And it was one of those pieces that I was naturally good at, that I could really like explore all the nuances and become even better and be a leader in the field of drafting. And I thought, that's amazing. But every time I got to a next level, junior engineer, project manager, there was no one else around me that was like me. And I thought, this is impossible. I'm not that smart. Like, I know the hood is smarter than me. I grew up in the hood. I know plenty of people smarter than me. And I thought, why is it that I'm here and no one else is here? Like, this makes no sense. And so then I just went upstream. I found out that I was an upstreamist because I said, you know what? If it's not happening down here, well, I better go back to schools and figure out how to really engage students, or at least give them a new face for engineering. Look at this. Me and you talk the same, look the same. I did this, you can do this. And really that was my goal for going back and going into teaching, was to just give a new face to engineering. So students understood that it wasn't just the typical Google illustration that you might find when you look up in engineering. And that just started to spill over. And I think every year, literally every day that I worked in that school, I just felt more and more empowered to do more, to bring more faces in, to bring more opportunities to my students, and to really just dive deeper into all the different ways in which they can be creative with technology, which included computer science, robotics, automation. And that was just really like the love of my life. That was where I filled up my cup every day and felt rejuvenated. I got an opportunity to lead the district's computer science department for 2 years, where I took my 20 students that I got to impact every year, and it grew to 3,000. And the work was still the same. It was still trying to really show students that we're not alone. We are unicorns, but like there's a lot of unicorns out there that need to be like shined up and be ready to get out there and feel good about themselves. Because, you know, if you're a unicorn, sometimes you think, maybe I shouldn't be here anymore. There are no unicorns. I should hide away. But no, I think Lily's right. There's a stampede of unicorns ready to come out of Oakland. And we are all part of a team of people that are really focused on making sure that the opportunities are there. And so right now I'm working with Bitwise Industries. I'm the vice president of Bitwise, and we're starting to activate some of our work here in Oakland. And it's been truly incredible to see my own trajectory. I went all the way to middle school, and I started to realize, well, what happens in high school? So then I got to see them in high school. And then you go, yes, you graduated, but what's next? And so now I'm trying to step in that gap and find my students who I taught 6 years ago who just graduated, and grab them again and be like, come on, still got you. Mr. Scott's still here. Mr. Scott's still repping Oakland. And there's so much genius, right? There's so many unicorns. So it's time to give them the opportunity to show their light.
It really is. Like, and we miss so many. We don't feed the unicorns. We cage the unicorns and kind of underdevelop the unicorns. And even just structurally, could you bring up that next slide, Josh, about internet performance? So, you know, one of the things that is challenging is just the way the structures undermine the ability to grow a unicorn that's not necessarily born to a unicorn family. So you look at even something like, even when you have internet, I saw one of the commentators put up a thing around, you need dependable, reliable internet. You know, the reality is, even when you have internet, if you're low income, you have worse internet for no reason except you're low income. So your speeds are lower. And so I think this came from one of the Kapor Center reports that you can see on their website. Sorry, I saw Toya had a question up about this. But again, structurally, what does this mean? And for folks who want to get into computer science, if I'm a senior with ghetto internet, am I going to get a 98? Like what, there's just these structural pieces even behind this that really undermine the ability of folks. So I'd love to hear a little about some of the barriers. Like you can see those structural infrastructure barriers, which again, our stuff is breaking out of that. Everyone should have the same internet. Everyone should have a device that fully allows them to participate in school. And that should be the standard, internet for all. One standard for everybody, not a rich standard, a poor standard that reifies our existing inequalities. So I'd love to hear some of the barriers that folks, and maybe you all even, we heard a little bit experience getting into the field, but I know you guys study that on a systematic basis, and let's talk for a minute about those barriers.
Yeah, I'm happy to dive in and talk, obviously from a research perspective, which is what I love to do. In terms of, as we're thinking about these massive tech companies and the extreme amounts of wealth that you just mentioned, Dirk, we like to look at the entire system, right? What does the entire structure look like? How have we created a system or a structure that enables these tech companies with this extreme amount of wealth to have between 2 to 3% of their employee base being Black or Latinx?
Mm-hmm.
So why? Let's start asking that question. So we looked at, we have a framework called the Leaky Tech Pipeline Framework, which looks at structural barriers at every stage of the pipeline, from K-12 education, higher education, the workforce itself, entrepreneurship, and venture capital. And honestly, it's heartwarming that we're having this conversation, and it's super frustrating that we're having this conversation because one of the original barriers, if we look at education inequality, has always been the digital divide. So we're saying foundationally, if students don't have access to internet, if they don't have access to devices, we can't even start talking about computer science courses. And Kennan and I know we've been doing this forever, talking about, okay, we got to get more CS courses in the high schools. We have to inspire students to want to take computer science. Without access to technology and internet, those students are already going to be significantly farther behind than their peers, even before we even start talking about computer science or any other subject matter. So that is, and I can send the link to the Leaky Tech Pipeline report, but the digital divide is one of the key barriers at the K-12 stage. And then you think about, okay, across a city like Oakland, if half of the students don't have access to reliable internet and then COVID hits, now we're trying to figure out how to get all students connected, which we need to think about solving this in a much more structural way. So I know we'll get into that conversation, but I'd love my colleagues to also weigh in.
Yeah, and I would love to add to that one is it is getting the device, it's getting the broadband access, it's getting the support to also know how to log in. Once you're even logged in, the speeds are right now, because of all these virtual and video, and now Zoom is the default. We need to make sure that we're asking for fast enough, if not the fastest type of internet, because right now when you have families where you have 2-3 kids, the Wi-Fi you're not gonna be able to have a reliable where the speeds of the video, you can have a conversation, so it's definitely impacting the learning. So I would love to on that end be able to have a dialogue. As you were bringing that chart that you mentioned earlier, I wanted to make a reference to that. That's from the Fastly source, and Fastly is a company that looks at all the web, and I highly recommend for folks to check it out. I'll put it in the link, because what was interesting is that before COVID, you see all the spreads of the speeds. And after COVID, their commitment by the internet providers were like, we're going to put everybody at the same speed. Well, now that should be the new standard going forward. And if anything, we should be continuing to increase the speeds as more kids are going to be continuing to learn this way, but so will other families and entrepreneurs and businesses. And I would, even from my end, I would even add a personal story that when we bought my first computer, back when I was a kid, early 2000s, even early like 1990s, we were hearing of the digital divide then, I was thinking of the digital divide when I used to be a USC undergrad, volunteering for the local schools, trying to teach the local kids like math and science as an engineering student. But USC back then even had a public Wi-Fi. They actually extended it to some of the community organizations that were around us. So we were able to do that back into the 2000s. It's 20 years later, right? I was already taking engineering master level classes at undergrad online. So if you can teach engineering back then, why are we teaching it better now? And so I think it's definitely this lack of future and investment and strategy of continuously development, but also having that lens of innovation. And it's also the inclusive design, because I do want to say also, and this is my other personal side here, where for me as an immigrant, if my mom didn't work that extra job to help us get the desktop, my first desktop, and I remember putting the pillow on top of it whenever I would go online because I didn't want her to hear, because it was the DSL dial-up. That's how I was learning. That's how I was discovering. And because whatever I couldn't do during school time, this was my time to explore and continue. And kids don't have that right now. And it's more than 20 years later. And kids now that used to depend on the public Wi-Fi at the cafes or schools, they're totally disconnected. They don't even get the opportunity to even continue to learn. And so we have to keep ringing in the alarms even much more than ever, because now it's fundamentally disconnected.
Yeah.
There's so many strong points there. Not to cut you off, Dirk, but it's just like the microscope with which we are now looking at everything, the magnifying perspective, right? That dialed in on the digital divide is one thing, right? We're actually in COVID. We're so micro on every part of our lives right now because we're living them 100% all the time. We're watching it 100% all the time. We're not caught up with the distractions of doing so many things. We're actually looking and really thinking about what's going on. And so, yes, the digital divide, we've been talking about it forever, but now we see it. We see it head on, deers in headlights. We're like, whoa, we can't deny it. And I'm always thinking, I saw there, on the comments, math and science, literacy. These are the places where in 5 years, we're going to look back at 2020 and go, man, the ripple effects of not giving students the ability to not only do extracurricular or fun, innovative ways to learn, but the basics.
Yeah.
The ripple effects of that, we're going to see for 20 years. Because, you're talking, I have a 5-year-old and I have an 11-year-old, right? In 5 years, they're just going to be starting their journey into adulthood, right? 6 years, 10 years. Still not going to know what the effects of a whole year and a half of less school is going to be on their ability to just do everything they have the ability, the power to do. They're unicorns, but are we dulling their horn? How are we really going to step up? And so I'm thinking in my head all the time about space. College students need space, right? Lily brought up the cafes, the free internet, the spots where you can just get close to an OUSD school and pilfer some internet, right? We don't have that. We don't have the ability to access space. So it's going to be very important moving forward as communities that we develop spaces that have internet there, hotspots with not just a hotspot, but a hotspot with a space to study. When you had your last episode and they were talking about the buses and converting old school buses into hotspots, I'm like, yeah, let's start getting some old RVs and opening them up and creating shady places where students can sit and work. These are Lily's forward thinking. This is where we have to be as a community, is how are we really going to step up together to solve this, come up with our own solutions and use what we have as you go to any third world country and the best part about it is the ingenuity. They make everything out of nothing. We got a bunch of stuff. Let's make something happen.
Again, Appalachia did it. Appalachia has better internet than I do. And everyone has it. They did it with mules across the mountains. And you're telling me we can't do it in East Oakland and West Oakland. That just doesn't, it's a matter of will, not a matter of resources in any sense. It's not rocket science. It's not teaching reading. It's literally just putting cables down, getting devices in kids' hands, and then giving training so folks can access this. This is actually a really simple problem to solve. And in a city like Oakland or a state like California, it shouldn't be hard to solve. You know, Chicago solved it. Chattanooga did kind of what you did. They just opened up 1 million hotspots to anyone. Every government building opened their hotspots. So they put high-speed internet and they opened hotspots at every government building. You know, this stuff is not rocket science, and that's the hard part of it for me. It almost makes it feel like it's by design. It is by design, but it's really that we're not fixing this because we don't really care to. Because if we really did fix it, it would upset the way things are right now. You know, if we had 500 Kennan, 500 Lilies, and 500 Allisons walking around Oakland, coming out of OUSD schools, it would be a much different place and with a much different power dynamic. And so I think part of this is meant to be this way. Josh, can you bring up just the let's just look at the actual who's working in tech right now. We've talked about how valuable these jobs are, and again, just the agency that these jobs give you. Like these folks, you know, it gives you an opportunity to be an owner, to be a designer, to be an engineer, rather than to be a serf or someone that's engineered upon or someone that's kind of owned. If you don't have digital access, if you don't have digital skills, what space is there for you in the modern economy besides being a busboy or something like that? Honestly, like even just working in Amazon in the warehouse, you're going to be using technology in a significant way. So this stuff is crazy, and so you can see tell us a little bit about what you guys do to try to change these barriers, some of the programs that are out there.
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about what we're doing at the Kapor Center. So again, we're really trying to look at the structural issues that are preventing students of color and communities of color from having access to meaningful participation in the technology economy, which is, as we all know, the economy of our future. So for all of the folks that are in Oakland, we see every day the impact of gentrification, the impacts of extreme amounts of wealth that have not been accessible to everyone. So there are a couple different things that we're trying to do in addition to the research, which is really just trying to do what we're doing now, is tell the story about why we see the barriers that we see and how we should be addressing them. And then the second thing that we do, we have a summer math and science honors academy program, which takes high school students of color, 10 sites across the country. We have about 1,000 students now who are starting in 9th grade, going through getting rigorous science, math, computer science, and also lots of leadership development, public speaking, a whole range of different things. We're thinking about how do we prepare the next crop of students for technology jobs. So that's one of our programs. Lili and I also work at the center to think about how do we disrupt some of these structural barriers. So I'm co-chair of the CS for California Coalition, which is working on how do we increase access to computer science across the state. Oakland was actually one of the sites that has done really, really well, obviously under Mr. Scott's leadership, has really honestly led the state and the country in many ways. Like Oakland Unified is like a shining example. And so what we try to do through that coalition is we can't go district by district. We have to think about what are some policy changes that we can get implemented to ensure that the most marginalized communities are going to be the ones that get access to computer science, where at this point, only about less than half of our high schools in California offer computer science courses. And when we looked at the numbers as of last year, in terms of Black students across the state of California, Black, let me get my stats right. I don't want to mess this up. 53 Black girls and 469 Latinx girls across the entire state of California, which has over 6 million students, took an AP computer science course. And the AP computer science course, for those that aren't like deep in the weeds, is a significant predictor of who's prepared and who goes on to major in CS in higher ed. So this is how we see all of these points being connected, and we have to start disrupting some of these systemic barriers. And I'll let Lili talk about our work on the digital divide, because again, this is one of those that we view as like, we cannot have a patchwork of solutions where we get a couple companies to donate some laptops. We need like systemic structural change.
Definitely, and as we've been discussing here, just even take a look at the OUSD perspective, where just looking at the makeup of the schools, right? We have a demographic that is primarily Black and Latinx. As of 2020, at the beginning of the year, it was reported it was 66, almost 67%. And so when we discuss how the percentage that are disconnected is still not connected, this is a huge issue locally. But as has been said, we can't do it district by district. We have to take a look at it at the California level. So the California level, there's actually been a lot of movement that I really hope that the silver lining of the current situation that we're in with the pandemic, the Black Lives Matter movement, and where we're going towards at the end of the year, even in the election cycle, right, where all this stimulus money is also starting to come, that we really have an opportunity that we haven't had in probably 1 or 2 generations, where we get to have the opportunity to think about the infrastructure that we need to develop. There are current bills right now that are in the California Senate that just actually got out of voting, to be able to look at what does it look like to invest in fast speed fiber networks, right? And that way we can make sure that we are not dependent on 1 or 2 or 3 providers, but we're actually providing the needed speed, accessibility, but across all zip codes. Just even within Oakland, we know that in East Oakland and West Oakland, the data shows the hotspots of where people are not connected. And these hotspots are not the ones that we connect to the internet. These are just the areas of huge need. What's been interesting is that there's an new investment that is coming, from example, from the BART, from the Caltrans, where they are, AC Transit, where they are, as they were trying to extend a line out in Fruitvale, they actually dug up the lines to be able to provide that opportunity for that level of infrastructure. Do we have a plan to activate that? That is a question. And so for the folks who are listening, diving into the discussion, because these are the things where we need your voice. We need you to be able to ask your district council member, what are we doing? How are we activating? How do we participate? And because otherwise it's just going to be another resource that goes unused. But at the state level, I definitely think that we need to continue to apply more pressure in the sense of holding a lot of these organizations and companies together. There are collectives of service providers. There's companies. There's been, if you read the recent press of all the different commitments, great. But those are one-time solutions. And once they actually get donated, how are they actually landing into the hands of the kids and the families? And are we actually measuring their learning? So I would say that this is a great opportunity for us to take a look at what does it look like to even redefine the metric of learning in this new world. How are we going to even be tracking how a lot of these decisions of what is effective learning or not, and when our own teachers are disconnected themselves, right? And so I think that this provides us a lot of different learnings and opportunities and reinvestments, but we also need to take a look at what are we measuring? And so actually, I would love Allison to also jump in here, because as the research, I'll step back. The data right now that we're missing is just having an understanding of what the need is. Just taking a look at all these charts that we've been sharing, my own research of doing at the federal level, state level, everybody has different measures. We don't really know how big the problem is, and that's the problem. I've been trying to also just do some math and being like, so how many students are really disconnected in Oakland? Can we get a straight number on that? And I think that that's something that, again, the folks that are listening, let's have the dialogue. Let's make sure that we are, following and reporting and saying like, hey, my student's not connected, and that we get you the resources as needed. But what else? What happens in the rural areas right now with the fires that we're seeing? I just got a message last night of the farm workers and their kids. The farm workers don't even have the opportunity to even set up their kids to even have distance learning. So we have right now a huge amount of kids in the rural areas that are literally not learning. And so I think those are the important issues of why working at the state level and federal level are really critical. And I think California has really the opportunity to lead other states in having this, given that the diversity of the types of students and families that we have to make sure that we're creating policy for the most inclusive. So then that way we get it right for everybody.
That's right on. I think that is our, like, if we fix it for the kids who need it the most, we fix it for everybody ultimately. And there's a benefit that the state, the nation, like in the same way that Appalachian town, it cut its unemployment to a third of what it was before the access stuff happened. There are benefits for everyone in this. And the idea that whole sets of kids are literally locked outside the schoolhouse door, and they're locked out by Comcast right now. One of the comments was around the provider issue. Most markets are really served by one or two companies. Those companies, strangely, all have the same price systems, basically. I don't think that's coincidental. And so even as we, increase access, these companies are just going to get rich off this. Like, it's not something they're doing out of the good of their hearts. And what we're seeing, even in what they're calling the sponsored agreements, where the districts agree to sign up 20,000 kids, like those agreements actually are boons to the companies themselves. And so we've had a system where I don't think we've really regulated or cared. We've handed over schoolhouse keys to private providers. And at the same time, we have not held those providers accountable for the immense responsibility of getting kids to school. And so I think there is a key piece around the deals with these companies. And again, the Keep America Connected stuff, they all promise to connect folks. There's no teeth in that. They don't connect them, they disconnect them. We have folks who sat for 13 hours trying to get connected on the phone with AT&T. In Oakland, let's dig in here a little bit and talk. One thing I wanted before, Lily, is what you said, that people have to hold this accountable. Like, ultimately, the status quo will win. The biggest dogs will eat first and throw scraps out to the rest of us, unless a bunch of unicorns get around and start pushing at the plate. And so I think that is the piece that needs to happen here. Folks need to get excited and fight about this, and change the structure that this is done. We need to emerge from this with a durable and equitable internet infrastructure that connects every kid, every family that needs it in California, in a way that's real connection. It's not ghetto speeds. And we can totally do that. So let's talk Oakland a little bit. Can you bring up, Oakland Undivided is the plan that we have here. We've got a bunch of money is coming in to provide access. The numbers we have are roughly half the kids are either unconnected or underconnected. The little bit of data we have about what happened last year, I think only 30 or so percent of special ed kids actually got service during that period. About 20 to 30% of kids never signed on across the district during that last period. So those kids basically miss half a year of school. And at the current rate, they're going to miss another half a year or year at school. And again, we have families with 15 kids in a household, literally 15 kids in a household sharing a hotspot. So that doesn't sound like it's undivided to me. And the challenge we've had with this is many families can't afford the basics right now. They can't afford food. And what I understand from Oakland Undivided is through private providers, and we're promising free or low-cost internet to families. That's the language in Oakland Undivided, as I understand it. And we can't afford low cost. A lot of families just can't. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about more. I know y'all are working with the groups. I think we need inside and outside, obviously. But I'd love to hear about what's happening in Oakland and what should be happening.
Well, I think something that came up in your last episode, or maybe one of the previous episodes, Dirk, was making a transition from internet being a luxury from when we were in, I had an Epson. That was my first computer. It was an Epson, green screen, DOS. Yeah. Throw my age out there for you all. But that was when MSN.com was a coming soon page, and you were ahead of your time. But that's not today. It is not a luxury. It is a necessity. It needs to be treated like a utility. If we need water, if we need gas, we need electricity, we need internet. And I think that's something that came up in one of your episodes, and I just thought that's a direction that we need to go in. That's going to help eliminate this monopoly piece, and at least it'll eliminate the the main line. When we go in and we build new subways, or we build new freeways, or we add a bus rapid transit to International, that should go with the fiber optic line in the center at the same time. Just like when you relocate the gas lines, you relocate that, and that's part of the city's infrastructure. And maybe the last 100 feet, like in Appalachia, the last 100 feet are up to some other way to get it to your house. But like ultimately, we're not in a point where it's okay to not have internet, period. Like period. Like we have to have internet. It's a must have. So it's a twofold. And what the ladies over here were talking about was like, you have to attack it at 2 times in 2 strategies. You have to attack it big, and you have to attack it community small, right? Mm-hmm. You have to have them both going. You have to have the Oakland Reaches giving out information and, equipment at the same time as you're changing the way in which we even perceive this idea of learning and what learning looks like and what's necessary for students to learn. Because we thought it was pencils, we thought it was book bags, we thought it was all these things that we give out before school starts, but really it's internet, and we know that. Mm-hmm. We know that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thoughts, ladies?
Definitely. Do you want to go, Allison, first, or I can jump
Do you want to talk about the Oakland focus, and then I have a couple comments at the state level?
Yes. I definitely, just picking up where Kennan discussed, yes, we need it at all different angles, right? But specifically here in Oakland, just that the project that the AC Transit has, how many folks are even aware of that, right? There's a stimulus, the California, on Friday, Governor Newsom announced that there's about $5.3 billion funding coming out. Oakland got a good amount of money. I believe it's about $39 million. And granted, the Oakland Undivided Working Group has that. And so I'm actually also to have the discussion both ways, right? So I'm part of also the table of the policy to make sure that we're not missing the opportunities as they're coming. There's a lot of movement right now that are a lot of our, and I don't know if it's not only Oakland, but other cities, right? If that this is really the opportunity, if you have your plan and you know what you're working for and you have the right metrics, this is the opportunity to leapfrog a lot of the missed opportunities in the past for fundamental infrastructure dollars. And so we need to be really smart about it, because this level of investment may not come back around for a while. And so, which is super critical. And if I take a little bit of a lens of my lens in Oakland, taking a little bit of like being an engineer, when you're developing a product, this is a part where we could actually learn from tech a little bit. When you're developing a product, you want to make sure that you're designing, again, for the most inclusive approach. So whoever has the most barriers, that's who you want to design your solution for. You want to go that extra mile. Specifically here in Oakland, where the majority of the students are Latinx, 32% are English learners. We have so many newcomers, so many different languages. Oakland is a really challenging place to tackle this, and we have to be really smart about it and bring in the necessary tools and resources. Because right now, I know people out in Fruitvale, and because I'm part of the Unity Council of their board, I get all the stories from the grant. I know families right now that are quote unquote checked, having the device and the Wi-Fi, but they won't log in because they're too scared because of their documented status, right? And so how do we need to have a much more empathetic approach into how we're designing and identifying what are some of those biggest gaps, because if we can get folks like that to feel more comfortable getting on and being able to connect, and once they're connected, how are we making sure that the students are actually learning? If we can get that right, then I think that could be an amazing model to then roll out in a different scale. And so I would say that for Oakland specifically, there's been a little bit of a narrative that I think needs to be also shared and discussed, because before even all of the funding that came in, right, from, we all saw the headlines, there was funding that went in to buy loaner laptops. So right now, most of the students tend to have the loaner laptops, and there's an opportunity here to get them more permanent and get them better equipment. However, there's still a huge gap. Well, and that's what we need to verify, which is how big is that gap for the students who are totally disconnected right now, who didn't get the loaner yet, or how are they going to be getting their permanent device and equipment? And looking back at the inclusive design as well, we want to make sure that when we take a look at the kids from K-5, they have a different learning need and adoption, and so they have a different device than older kids, right? And so there are also a lot of supply chain issues that are out of the control really of out of districts, right? So right now there's a lot of districts trying to order as many, and given with COVID and the limited weight, that we can get from their manufacturers, there's a lot of issues on that end. Fortunately, Oakland made their orders ahead of time. The equipment it's coming in, it's coming at a good flow. But do we know that the most in need are getting it? And how do we know if they were already disconnected before the digital divide? And so this is where I really want to, again, to the folks who are watching this is, I want to give some love out to all the community-based organizations, because I feel that that's going to be the change here that's needed to engage them much more, to bring them into the parent engagement, to really leverage, and as a whole community, as a village, really be like, okay, you may not have the team out here to be supporting, let's say, a specific zip code out in Oakland, but you know what? There's the East Oakland Collective that is helping families. There's different areas in West Oakland. And so I think that this is really the opportunity for Oakland to shine by relying on its community that has this social justice passion, and more than ever before. I think it is really the opportunity to do that, but we all need to show up. And so I think that it's a twofold. However, I do want to make sure that we are holding accountable. There is a lot of money. There is a lot of need and urgency that we need to be really thinking out of the box and making sure that we're not just thinking short term of how are we even prioritizing schools and districts, right? I would love to see the data on that. And how are we also thinking long term? And so that's where I hope that I can play a role in helping connect the dots into the larger narratives of what's happening at the state, what's happening at the national level. So with that said, I'm going to hand it over to Allison so she can talk a little bit more about that side.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lily. Dirk, would you guys mind going back to the slide about the statewide need?
Can you hit that up, Josh?
I think this one, so this really stands out for me. And Lily and I have spent so much time. First of all, I think that is another challenge. We've spent so much time trying to dig into the data and figure out what is the actual level of need. Where is there like one centralized data source? So there's a lot of information coming out from the CDE and from the governor's office. So the estimated need was 700,000 laptops, 300,000 Wi-Fi hotspots. So first of all, just stopping there and saying, you know what, we should take a step back and say we're all kind of responsible for the fact that we're even in this predicament to begin with. So let's just say that and say, okay, so now how are we going to address this? As Lily said, we can do a ton of work at the grassroots level, which I love. I think that's absolutely critical. And at the state level, how are we also applying the appropriate amount of pressure to ensure that we don't end up in this exact same predicament again, or that this doesn't just continue on beyond this one moment where we're in the spotlight because students are learning from a distance. And so a couple of things that I've been thinking about. One is, and I think this was a data point that came out when some of the tech companies were called before Congress. So we've been thinking federal, there's a ton of money coming down from the federal government. So how are we ensuring that we're holding our representatives accountable and that we're advocating strongly for what we need in terms of dollars to flow down to the local areas? There was a data point about Amazon has 100 lobbyists, or we're over 100 lobbyists. We also have power though. We also there's a lot of public pressure that we can apply. And I would just also argue that I think we should be thankful for the one-time donations. We need philanthropy. We need tech companies to play their part. They should be donating resources, dollars, supplies, but we also need them to be part of the structural solutions. And so I feel like that if I could leave us with one comment, I think we have power to push them, to pressure them on what the structural solutions are beyond a one-time gift to any city. Because while it's great to see what Oakland was able to do in a short amount of time with a major donation, Lily and I have been talking about what's happening in the Central Valley. Like, how are we ensuring any of those folks are being connected? Where's the no money's flowing to them. So we do need state level infrastructure and federal level infrastructure.
Yeah, and that's right on. Like, again, it can't be, Oakland has a lot of capacity to fight around this stuff. Some other places don't have that same level of capacity. And so it shouldn't, it can't be on each locality to have to figure this out. It really has to come down from the top. And then the locals figure out those solutions. But there's a ton of money. Again, $2 trillion came up in the first stimulus. Boeing got $17 billion as a line item. That could solve this for every single kid in the US, that's $17 billion. That could wire every kid and give them an appropriate device. Boeing got that. So we can find money when we want to find money. It's just a matter of who are we finding money for and who gets left behind. And I do want to just keep emphasizing that long-term answer piece here. I just think this crisis can't just be like we figured it out for 6 months or this year. Like, this crisis has been here before. The digital divide, digital apartheid was here before COVID. It's just making us face it down in a different way right now. And if we don't come out of this with an actual real infrastructure that solves the problem, Kerala in India has free broadband for everyone. You mentioned like kind of countries, developing countries and figuring it out. Kerala does, Appalachia does, and Oakland can't. And California, the richest state, in the richest country in the history of the world, can't figure out how to get kids online. And in these fires, if you even want to survive, how do you even know you can watch the fire line? But really, you're on CAL FIRE right now and watching their website to understand whether you're an evacuation order. Like, if you don't have internet, what? In so many different ways. And so this is an opportunity for us to solve this, to not just jump from lily pad and have a short-term fix, but to solve this. And I think everyone has said this. It's community that'll make that happen.
And I want to add that specifically this year, giving it an election year, there are items on this ballot, both locally, nationally, but in other states. If there is an opportunity where we need more folks to show up, especially the ones that have been left out for many, many years, right? Because what you're going to get is there are students that are connected. There are students that are learning, but where specifically, what are some of those gaps? And so I think this is the opportunity for us who have the opportunity to vote, to learn and get out and like make yourself be heard, because especially in California, there are specific propositions that can help change some of this. And so I think it's an important opportunity for all of us to be more engaged and aware as individuals. And I think that this is really, really a critical election year to look at that. So I would encourage everybody here to take a look at California, what's on the ballot, and get informed about that. And I think going back to the point of that especially here in Oakland, I do want to give a shout out to Tech Exchange, who has been the amazing provider and just hustling and really in like full startup mode of mobilizing, not just this year, but for the past, probably like the last decade. Everybody that when I started working at Kapor, they're like, oh, I got my first laptop from Tech Exchange, right? And so how do we actually systematize more of these, right? We can't be relying also on one or two organizations. How do we take a look at this at a larger scale across? So then that we make sure that every zip code is covered equally at the same, and the ones that are in the highest need are the ones that are prioritized. So I definitely want to give a shout out to that. And I think in being able to be in this digital first world, I also would love to see more technology being adopted, and hopefully having that data transparency. As a data nerd, I would love to see an open source map of what is happening right now. We know the problems, but what are the solutions? What do we know? What's working? How do we knowledge share the challenges? Because it is hard. And I want to make sure that it is for the folks who are on the ground who are trying to do this work, to make sure that they don't feel that they're also being not heard or seen. We see them. And I think that's the thing is that we just want to make sure that we're doing this at a systemic level, as Allison clearly pointed out, and we need all hands on deck, and we need those types of key takeaways to make it into policy. So then that way we make sure that we are holding ourselves and our elected officials accountable for those long-term solutions.
100%. So we're getting ready to kind of wrap up. I'd love to, a couple of things that I've seen in some of the comments is just the role of community. And just overseeing that this is actually working the way it's supposed to work. I just think that part is critical. Tech Exchange is part of that community. I think the East Oakland Collective, Oakland Reach, the actual folks at school sites, like we actually need community involved in oversight and accountability. Again, Amazon may have 100 lobbyists. We got 20 million citizens. And so we got to make that work. We also had a request from a school board member. We are working on a distance learning policy in OUSD that folks would really dig in on that. And next week, we're going to talk about that some on the show, and really having a policy that guarantees what our kids need and is accountable to our community. So we'd love for you all to participate and just be a partner in making sure that policy actually works for families. A lot of money is going to come in. where that money goes and what it pays for and who leaves town with it in their pocket, or whether it stays here, is going to be dependent on us. So I would love to just hear from each of you a little bit about kind of final thoughts, stuff that we should be doing with the community to move this forward. Would just love to hear from y'all as we start to wrap the show up.
Kennan, I feel like we've hogged a bunch of the time. We want to hear from Mr. Scott.
You know how I feel. You know how I feel. And anytime I can listen to two data nerds talk data, I get all crazy excited. I'm thinking GIS maps, and that's where my head's at. I think last thoughts is we're working this out. And I, as a parent and a former OUSD member, like, I think it's just like, it's at site level. And when it's at site level, it's in the hands of the community. And so if your school is doing a good job, applaud those teachers who are working hard to figure out how to transition themselves to a digital platform in this way, in this quick fashion. And if you're at a site where it's really challenging, that's the time to involve your school board members. That's the time to involve your local community. I'm looking at Higher Ground, and they're like consistently telling us about how, in the comments, how they're providing some really good services to add on. And last but not least, I think we also need to start talking about tech adjacency. That's a whole nother comment and a whole nother world of opportunities that'll open up for all of our unicorns.
Appreciate it. Allison, Lily?
Lily, go for it.
Sounds good. I think everything that's been said here, I think, has been just so on point, and making sure that we do understand how big is the problem and what's our progress in closing that gap. I think is one of the parts that I would love to see. And so I think that in this specific issue, even reframing from digital divide to digital disconnection. So then that way we can go and look at, it's not just the high speed broadband access, but it's really the device one-to-one for families, thinking of it as a unit, but it's also the last mile of how do we reimagine the learning experience for some of the students. We have an opportunity here, even through these crises and through the challenges, to actually leapfrog and think out of the box. This is really our opportunity to go and see these really challenging times as really the next evolution and what can we deliver to the next generation. And I think from my end, I spent a lot of time at the Kapor Center trying to get folks excited and see the importance of technology. And then the silver lining is that this pandemic has showed everybody how important it is, whether we were ready for it or not. But now we just got to pick up and we got to go, and we got to go in together, and we got to go fast. And I think this is the part that we really all need to put aside any types of differences, egos, challenges, and really look at what is the problem that we're trying to solve, have an agreement, have a shared vision so we can get that done. And it's time to really look at infrastructure. So number one, take a look at the very fundamentals. What are we doing on the ground, right? Both in the city level, state level, but federal. There's supposed to be also a lot of additional funding coming, or at least for broadband at a national level. Let's hold them accountable to make sure that happens. Same thing in California. We got the executive order that says, like, yes, high-speed broadband, all these dollars. Okay, let's follow through and see how are we applying, and how is each district and each zip code in Oakland specifically also being serviced with that. And then also let's remember that we have this opportunity, at least for us, for the folks who are not necessarily on the ground with the students. We want to make sure that we also appreciate the teachers and appreciate everybody in the work that's doing this, because I think this is a time that we need to be united more than ever, and we need to make sure that we're helping each other get better. And then that requires transparency, that requires dialogue, and sometimes it's gonna require for us to disagree. But it is a time where we need to change some of these barriers, some of these monopolies that for too long have held us back. It's time, and if we don't do it now, when are we going to do it?
Hallelujah.
I knew I should have gone first. How do I follow that up? First of all, I just wanted to really appreciate the comments. And shout out to Jamoke and all of the work that folks who are doing every day, day in and day out in Oakland with the community, with our young people. My sister's a teacher in Oakland Unified, has been for quite some time. And I understand fully all of the challenges that are facing the folks who are really doing the hard work, interfacing with our students. My last closing comment is, again, I think we have power to create structural change. I think we should take advantage of that power and think about how can we work together in coalitions with folks at the local level, pushing at the state level. All of us have the same interests, as Lili was saying. We all want what's best for our students, especially those who have been traditionally marginalized and left out of these opportunities. And I think we have a great opportunity to hold our elected officials accountable and also hold tech accountable. So let's do this together.
Right on, and appreciate you all 100%. And I just think that the power for structural change, we do have that power. That's the Frederick Douglass quote around like power concedes nothing without virtue. The other part of that is like show me the exact amount that someone will quietly submit, and I'll show you the exact amount to which they'll be oppressed. And so the reality is there's an interplay between power, and to the extent we're silent, it's going to just roll the way it's rolling right now, with the same status quo, with some black and brown faces on a brochure, and our kids in the same place 2 years from now that they are right now, and a bunch of money gets spent and nothing else happens. So I want to thank you all for joining us. Please follow the work of the Kapor Center and Kennan. Next week is actually a pretty big week for us. We're doing a nationwide day of action across several cities, with protests happening in Philly, DC, Jersey. I can't remember, 6 or 7 cities and we'll do some Oakland work too, particularly pushing on OUSD around a policy on distance learning that actually guarantees, from a district perspective, what our kids need. We'll have a toolkit we'll be sharing, so anybody across the country who wants to participate in this can. And we'll have a lot of ways you can get involved. Here are some key ways that we want folks. This is about you making this happen. You can get involved by just getting involved with us. Join our Facebook forum. Join us for the National Day of Action. We'll have a bunch of stuff that you can check in on our site. We also have a tribal action right now. The tribes have an opportunity to bid for their own spectrum, and they need to have an extension of time in order to do that. So you can just sign this letter asking Congress to give tribes more time to apply for their own spectrum. We got 35,000 folks who signed our petition, including Arnie Duncan and Jeb Bush. We want to get up to 100,000. So please sign that, pass it around. The FCC has power to regulate the internet like a public utility. It could force internet providers not to shut people out. They have just backed away from taking any action. So we need to just keep bombing on them, not literally, in terms of making them know that we care and making them pay attention. And your congressperson actually runs the FCC. So you should reach out to them as well and just demand internet for all. So I want to thank everyone who's been a part of this. I really appreciate y'all and getting to know you. This is going to be the start of many more such conversations, I think, and that partnership around making Oakland a place that actually delivers on the promises of equity. We hear so much talk here about equity, blah, blah, blah. We got to walk that shit out. And so I look forward to like marching down this path with y'all and doing this and making this happen, making internet for all a reality for our kids. So thank you so much for being here. Thanks for everyone that participated online. And join us Wednesday for our day of action. Thank you so much.